In this chapter, we are going to talk about head-to-head movement. And if you have a textbook, it's on chapter 10, and it starts on 289. And in this chapter, we are going to talk about a movement. So maybe T moves to C, or T moves to a B, that kind of movement. And we move things around in order to derive word orders that expert theory can't really account for. And I'm going to discuss what kind of word order expert theory cannot explain. So there is a problem with an expert theory, which is the fact that expert theory always wants a head and its complement right next to each other. What I mean is that, for example, we have a head, a verb, and then next to the verb, we have a noun phrase, a direct object of a verb, such as eat a banana. And if expert theory is correct, nothing can come between the verb and the NP object. If that's the case, expert theory cannot account for the word order such as verb, subject, object, as explained here. And 9% of the world's languages, that is really rare. However, there are languages that exhibit verb, subject, object order. For example, Irish is that kind of language. However, expert theory always wants a verb and an object next to each other. So expert theory cannot account for the fact that in Irish, a subject intervenes between a verb and an object, as shown here. So if we want to say Mary kissed the leprechaun in Irish, we have to have a word order, kissed Mary the leprechaun. Leprechaun is maybe something you haven't heard of. In Ireland, people believe that there is a fairy tale that lives at the bottom of the rainbow, and we call that leprechaun. And in Irish, the subject intervenes between the verb and its complement. And if we follow the X-bar structure, we cannot draw a tree like this. So in order to explain this kind of word order, we are going to introduce something that's called transformation in this chapter. Transformation in Japanese means henke, or it means ido. Transformation rule changes the shape. Maybe you've heard of a movie called Transformers. In this movie, things change its shape. The robot becomes a train or police car or whatever. It's a boys' movie that the boys really like. In X-bar structure, we also have a rule that transforms things. And in transformation, we move things around in order to account for example, a VSO word order in Irish. We also have moved things around. Maybe you remember affix lowering. There's an example where we have a past tense ed, and that affix lowers and goes to stay with a verb. Or you also might remember that we have a subject auxiliary inversion. What it means is that in yes/no questions, we moved auxiliaries or tense above the subject to satisfy a plus Q feature under C and form a question from an interrogative sentence. And we'll use this transformation to account for word order paradoxes, like a VSO order in Irish. And this is the transformation. What is very interesting is that it's called head-to-head movement. So you move a head and you attach that head with another head. So in expiratory, head moves and goes to stay with another head. Or if it's a NP moves and goes to stay with another phrase like CP. So if it's a head, then it moves to a head position. If it's a phrase, it moves to a phrase section. If it's a specifier, it moves to a specifier position. So in that sense, there is a unity of specifier heads and complements. Before we talk about Irish word order, I want to touch upon French adverbs first. As you know, adverbs are adjuncts. But adverbs in French appear between the verb head and the object. Let's look at the sentence below. In this sentence, I eat often the apples. What you notice is that the adverb often, in French it's souvent, appears between a verb and its direct object. And we just said that expiratory doesn't allow anything intervening between a head and its complement. So again, the expiratory cannot account for a word order like this in French, where an adverb intervenes between a verb and its complement. And in English, we say, I often eat apples. So an adverb often precedes a verb eat. So nothing comes between eat and apples. So as far as English is concerned, the expiratory has no problems whatsoever. However, if we want to explain the word order in French, we meet another problem. And here again, we are going to use a rule that transforms the sentence, that moves things around in order to account for a French adverb placement. But let's now first look at an English tree and an English adverb like often. In this tree, you notice that an adverb often is an adjunct. Adjunct is something that doesn't always need to be there, あってもなくてもいいもの. So, I eat apples, that's a fine sentence. But if you want to modify the frequency of your eating, you can say, I often eat apples, or I always eat apples, or I seldom eat apples, or I never eat apples. So you can use these adverbs in order to modify or account for a frequency of your eating apples. Here again, often is an adverb. It's an adjunct. It's an あってもなくてもいいもの. And when we want to attach an adjunct into an expiratory, we use a bar level. So here we see V bar, and then V bar goes to an adverb phrase and another V bar. So we use this bar level in order to stick something into a tree. So here often is stuck into a verb phrase and it attaches to its V bar. So this makes sense. But what happens if it's in French? You remember often intervenes between eat and apples. However, adjunct cannot intervene between B and NP. or nothing can intervene between B and NB. So how can we explain this word order? Before we get to a French tree, let's take a look at different sentences comparing French and English adverbs. So, I often eat apples in English is here introduced in B. The example in A is a French counterpart of B. I eat often apples. So, as I said before, souvent, often, intervenes between a main verb eat, mange, and its direct object apples. In French here, des pommes. So instead of saying I often eat apples, in French you have to say je mange souvent des pommes. And souvent comes between eat and apples. So A and B are examples of simple present tense. What happens when we take a look at genzai kandoke, which is a present perfect tense? When we take a look at present perfect tense, you notice that there are no differences between word order in French and English. So what we saw in A and B disappears in C and D. Sorry, this is a D, but it says B, but it's C and D. So in D, which is an English example, I have often eaten apples. If we translate it to French, you say j'ai souvent mangé des pommes. I have often eaten apples. So in A, the adverb often came between a verb and its direct object. But in C, the adverb often comes before the verb. So in C, nothing comes between a main verb eat and its direct object apples. So there are no differences between French and English word orders in C and D, and it's because C and D are in present perfect tense instead of simple present tense. Here what you see is something really new called neg-p. This stands for negation phrase, and neg-p in the same way as tp goes to neg-bar and then the head neg. And neg means negative, and neg-head is occupied by a negative phrase, not. And this neg-p comes between tp and bp in world languages, including English. And now let us compare French and English negation sentences. Here we have A, B. These are simple present sentences. And C, D, again, these are present perfect sentences. And in French, we consider the word PAS, pas, to be equivalent of English not. And what you see in A and B is again this contrast in word order. Let me start with the English example B. I do not eat apples. Here, we have to do a do support in English, but in French, we do not have a mechanism of do support, and what we get is I eat not apples. And when we look at present perfect tense, as I said before, there is no difference between English and French word order. So C is I have not eaten apples. D, I have not eaten apples. They appear to look in the same way. and T position is occupied by an auxiliary have. And verbs appear in the VP position. However, when there is no auxiliary that occupies a tense, in French, a verb has to move from a V to T. Conclusion: there is a verb movement from a V position to a T position in French. However, there is no such movement in English, and we have to do a do support in order to support an empty T in a TP in English. So this again explains a verb raising mechanism in French. So as we discussed before, in French we have adverb souvent, often, between a verb and an NP. And in the same manner, we have a negation pas, not, between a verb and its complement. So in order to achieve this word order, we have to move the verb mange to be with a T, and after the movement, what it appears to look is that there is adverb intervening a verb head and its complement. The same movement takes place in the negation phrase, and the verb mange moves up and stays with a T. Again, what this movement yields is that I eat not the apples, that word order. And this verb raising, which is observed in French, also in Irish, the mechanism of verb raising is motivated by the textual tense suffixes. For example, in English, the suffix in T, for example, a past tense ed, lowers and attach it to the verb. So there is a T to a V movement. It's a lowering of affixes. In French, there is a reverse movement. The verb raises to a T and it gets the suffix on the verb. And these differences, according to Chomsky, are explained referring to the parameter. So parameter, I've discussed before, I think some people might remember, is like an on-off switch. And you can turn it on or you can turn it off. And there's a particular parameter that is about availability of verb raising. So if your language have a verb raising from a V to T, then you turn on the parameter. If your language doesn't have a verb raising, as in English, you turn off the verb raising parameter. And if the parameter is set to have no verb movement, in these languages, T lowers to a verb. And verb raising in Vata, this is a language called Vata, and Koopman 1984 discusses these examples in A and B. Here, what's clear is that A is present perfect tense, and B is a simple present tense. In A, in the T position, you see an auxiliary have. However, in B, in the tense position, you just have a present tense. And as you can see here, we have rice eaten. There is no verb movement in A. The verb eaten stays in the V position, because the tense is filled with another lexical item have, there is no movement, no requirement for suffixes to be with the verb. So the verb just stays downstairs in the position where it originates from. But things are different in B. In B, tense has a present tense, but there is no auxiliary that's occupying the position. So this suffix of present tense has to attract a verb. So in Bata, this is a verb movement language. There is raising of a verb to the T position. So as you see in B, we eat rice. Eat originated from the position after the noun rice. So we, rice, eat. But this eat moves up to be with a present tense in T. So again, this behavior is explained by having a parameter. So if you are learning this language Vata, you turn on the verb raising parameter and you enforce the rule where verb moves up to a T.